It's going to be Listeria, specifically Listeria monocytogenes. So what's the most important thing about Listeria to remember? If you remember nothing else about it, anything come to mind?
It's catalase positive.
Well, other things are catalase positive too, right?
True. Oh, the bioesculin thing, a check, and
What was the other one that was with the bioesculin thing? Listeria. Should be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Listeria.
The only thing I can think of is that like it survives in the cold.
That's an important thing. But the big one is going to be your umbrella motility at 22 or at room temperature. So that's a huge factor for Listeria, is that motility, umbrella motility at 22. We'll go over that a little bit later as well. So tumbling motility. Often referred to as umbrella. So super important for Listeria. So I'm going to highlight this one. Then I'm going to put a nice little picture in, so y'all know what that means. But sometimes it, just because you like know it says that, doesn't always mean you know what it looks like in the lab. Okay, so here's your tumbling motility, the umbrella motility. Which one is your positive? Are they both positive? Are they both negative? Is one positive and one negative?
Is the left positive?
The left is positive right here, and this right is negative. It just has this right here because that's where you inoculate it. So you have to take the inoculum and stick it down in there, and so that's why you get this little line here. But this is the actual umbrella motility, and there's more perfect examples like on the internet and stuff, but generally this is what it's going to look like. And then another important aspect to this tumbling motility is that it's motility in the SIM broth at room temperature, but not 37. So what's room temperature average?
$22.
22. Sometimes it'll say 25, 22, but the big thing to know is that it's at room temperature. So only tumbling motility at room temperature, not at 37 degrees. We talked about bioesculin. Bioesculin positive. It's going to be your H2S negative, whereas most of the others are positive. If you look at your little differentiating chart on, what is it? I think that one's from the purple and yellow book. Yeah, so from the purple and yellow book on gram-positive rods, it gives you your catalase, your esculin, your H2S, and your beta hemolysis. And if you can't remember those all individually, if you remember out of those 4, Listeria is only negative for the H2S and is positive for everything else. So esculin positive, catalase positive, beta has beta hemolysis. And so again, if you like, you don't have to sit there and memorize everyone, but if you can say, okay, these are the 4 differentiating ones in the purple and yellow book for gram-positive rods, and Listeria is only H2S negative. And then we talked about the cold enrichment. So this is another important factor to Listeria, and I'll tell you how I remember it here in a minute. So for cold enrichment, I remember that because Listeria sounds like hysteria. And when you're super hysteric, you need to cool down. Does that make sense? Might not work for you, but that's always the way I was able to remember it. So Listeria is your cold enrichment because Listeria sounds like hysteria, and when you're super hysteric, you need to cool down. Infections. So your big, broad infection is going to be like your listeriosis. We'll start with neonatal sepsis. It's issue and meningitis. And it has an increased fatality rate compared to possibly other things that cause neonatal sepsis and meningitis. So Listeria is not what you want to get. It also causes sepsis in immunocompromised hosts. With increased fatality as well. I told y'all, but I'll go ahead and include it in too. So increased fatality or morbidity. It also has like a liking for the CNS system. Can cause endocarditis. And these are all specific for immunocompromised hosts. And what you would do is just culture either blood or CSF. Listeriosis is the broad disease state. And then pregnancy, it can arise during the 3rd trimester and has been known to cause spontaneous abortions in stillborns. And then there's been a few outbreaks from ingested food. And these can be anything from dairy, meat, etc. And then your antibiotic or antimicrobial. I'll put antibiotic this time. I try to switch it up because sometimes everyone knows what antibiotic is but doesn't think of antimicrobials the same way. So your antibiotics of choice is going to be ampicillin. It is a gram-positive lactobacillus. And then once you subculture it, what does it mean by subculture? If I told you that to subculture it, what does that mean? Anyone have a good guess?
A culture that's not from the direct source.
Exactly. So once you have it plated, then you're taking, you're isolating that specimen onto a new plate. And so once you do that, they're often coxoidal. They're either in singly or short chains, or it can also be palisades. Y'all remember what palisades are?
In rows.
In rows. Yep, parallel. And these gram-positive coxobacilli are not usually seen on CSF. Now your sheep blood auger, you're going to see small, round, smooth, and translucent colonies. And y'all know what the hemolysis is for this? The Listeria. Going to be a narrow zone of beta hemolysis. And actually, it's so narrow that to see this narrow zone of beta hemolysis, it's only visible when the colony is removed. So, like, let's say you took your little loop and you took the colony off. That's when you'd see that narrow zone of beta hemolysis. So your optimal growth is about 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. And it's important to note that this is different than your motility. So it's only motile at room temperature, but its optimal growth is 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. And so if you can remember that cold enrichment too, that's a little colder than body heat, right? And definitely note that the optimal growth is different than when it's motile. Hippurate hydrolysis positive. And this is like the S-agalactaceae, but it's catalase positive. And what are all your strep species? Strep, cat, and egg, right? So they're all catalase negative. And so when you have things like this that are similar to other organisms, it's good to know the difference in them. So even though it's not in the same group per se or the same chapter, if they're similar, it's good to know the differentiating features. So this one's light. Yay. But the difference is going to be your catalase positive. Bile esculin positive. And now an important feature or differential feature is going to be a positive CAMP test. Now, when it says a positive CAMP, is it the same as your CAMP test that you use your Staph aureus and to differentiate your streps? Have y'all talked about the CAMP test as far as Listeria goes? You actually use your Rhodococcus equi, EQI. So what you do is you streak this rhodococcus instead of your Staph aureus for your camp test. And instead of, what shape do you get on your positive camp test?
An arrowhead.
An arrowhead. And so instead of an arrowhead, your positive Listeria camp test is going to have a block shape. And then your VP positive, and that's your Vogt's Kraskauer. And then I'm going to come back and highlight this camp positive because this is differential between the other Listeria species. Any questions so far?